So this one. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Very excited to be here with you today. I'm looking forward to addressing your questions at the end when we have the Q&A session, I think. I also have two of my partners here today, Mrs. Ying Li and Mr. Warren Wong. So if you have questions about the US legal process, if you don't find me or I'm busy, please feel free to talk to them and ask your questions. This is a brief summary of who we are. We're a US firm based in New York with an office in Florida and an office in Washington, D.C. Our main practice is to help Asian companies become listed in the US. We are working with Chinese companies, Singaporean companies, Japanese companies, Malaysian companies, and we are looking forward to working with Korean companies as well. So this is a pretty much up-to-date list of the IPOs we've closed so far in 2025. We represent both the issuers and the underwriters. If you look at this slide, there was a Korean listed company based in Hong Kong that also got listed on Nasdaq at the end of last year, Wingyip, this is where we did our first deal in Korea with a Korean company. More deals that we closed. We've been ranked in top two law firms in the US for the number of IPOs. And we also work on US companies going public in the US. But our core practice is really Asian companies. So today I'll walk you through the benefits of a Nasdaq listing, some requirements to be listed on Nasdaq, a brief overview of the documentation required and the process, and then of course talk about once you're listed, what's your ongoing compliance requirements. So the benefits of Nasdaq are really, let me tell you a bit about Nasdaq first. Opens in 1971, was the first automated exchange in the world. It's one of the major stock exchanges in the US and the second largest stock exchange in the world by market capitalization today. As of May 2025, there were more than 3,200 companies listed on Nasdaq. With a focus on technology, most technology companies go and get listed on Nasdaq. In the first half of 2025, there were 142 new listings on Nasdaq, IPOs, raising approximately $19 billion. And those include straight IPOs as well as SPACs. This presentation is really going to focus on a regular IPO. I may touch upon a SPAC, but I think this is really more on a regular straight IPO. What are some of the benefits of listing on the Nasdaq? Liquidity. Nasdaq is known for its high trading volume and liquidity. The previous speaker was showing you some slides comparing the liquidity in the US to some other markets. Once you get listed on Nasdaq, it's very prestigious. It's home to many well-known companies, technology companies, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Tesla, and some others. So being listed on Nasdaq makes you part of a big, large group of companies, and your reputation is going to increase. Market exposure, it provides a platform for companies to gain exposure to a broader market. Also, as discussed earlier, it gives you some tools to grow your company for future acquisitions or future financings. Once you're listed on Nasdaq, you also have access to institutional investors, which you wouldn't have before. You get coverage from analysts, and it's Nasdaq, while attractive to technology companies, also is as a platform for many other industries. The listing requirements for Nasdaq are they are a little easier than the other markets in Asia. They are very clear, and even though they change regularly, they are easy to follow. There are a foreign private issuer, which is a company that's not domesticated in the US, are subject to lesser requirements than US company, which gives them a little bit more flexibility. There might be some change to this, but we'll discuss this later. There's no real requirement on profitability. So once you're listed on Nasdaq, as long as you maintain the ongoing requirements for staying on Nasdaq, being profitable is not an issue. Some other exchange do require that. Being listed on Nasdaq also gives you the opportunity to raise more money. Usually, whatever you raise in the IPO is not really that much. The upside of being listed on the Nasdaq comes later when you do subsequent offerings, like follow-ons or ATM offerings or pipes. That's where you have the larger investors coming in now that you're listed on Nasdaq, and that's where you have the opportunity to raise more money. It's easier listed on the stock exchange. Liquidity in the market performance. It's a case study of one of our and raised $70 more million. And then another one generating gross proceeds of 125 million. So even if the IPO proceeds were not that significant, in the next few years, they were able to raise more than $200 million. So that's the main reason why companies get listed on the Nasdaq. They have really access to liquidity. The IPO is just the first step. Once you're listed and you meet the criteria, for example, you have to wait 12 months. You have access to capital. So what are the requirements? So the stock market is the second largest world by market capitalization, behind the New York Stock Exchange. The Nasdaq and the Nasdaq Global Select market for large cap companies. Most of the IPOs that we work on for FPIs coming from Asia Most of them are on the capital market. I'll just briefly talk about this. Earlier in September, the Nasdaq announced proposed changes to its listing standards. They wanted to address some concerns they had about volatility and wanted to sort of lift the bar a little bit for the listing standards. They increased the minimum company public float under the net income standard, which is the standard that most companies use to get admitted to Nasdaq. They increased it to 5 million. They also want to accelerate the process of spending at least what it currently is. The Nasdaq these standards implemented the company IPO process would have, as proposed, you complete their application with Nasdaq under the current requirements, and all new listings, once the rule is approved, all new listings would have to comply with the new rule. There have been some comments issued by players in the market, and we don't know when the SEC will confirm the rule or whether some of the changes will be reflected in the final rule. So those are the initial listing for capital market. Said usually fall under the standard. Have net income for the last 2 fiscal years of $750,000. You also need market value of unrestricted publicly held shares, which is the public float, currently 5 million, but with the current rules would go up to 15 million. Those are the standards for the Nasdaq global market. I won't discuss those. They're higher because the companies applying to this tier of Nasdaq are larger companies. And this is the highest tier on the market, the Nasdaq Global Select Market, where the requirements are a little bit more stringent as well. So to go in the US and be listed on the Nasdaq, there's a process with documentation to be submitted to Nasdaq and the SEC. So we'll just talk about it a bit. Someone from the auditor will discuss this in way more detail. Know way more about this than I do. This is just a high-level summary, but they must be prepared in accordance US GAAP or reconciled to US GAAP as under the SEC rules, or they must follow the IFRS standards. Usually, a foreign private issuer files a registration statement on Form F1 at the SEC, and that registration statement include audited financial statements for the past 2 years, and they have to be audited by an independent auditor, and that auditor must also include an audit report. So the consolidated financial statements must include a balance sheet, income statements statements of change in equity, statement of cash flows, and schedules are required. This is a very important slide. What we see is really for a company to be ready to start the process of applying to Nasdaq and become a listed company in the US. It requires sometimes for the company's financials to be ready, so that when they start the process, they have their 2 years of financials audited. It takes time, and it's really key to getting the IPO done. So hiring the right auditor for your IPO is really important. It must be prepared in compliance with US GAAP or IFRS. There can be prepared to according to local GAAP, but we have to disclose the variations. In terms of aging, once when you want to become effective with the SEC, you need 2 years of audited financials, and the oldest financial statements must not be more than 15 months old. Usually you have to request a special dispensation from the SEC if your financials are more than 12 months and less than 15. Just a brief discussion on what is a foreign private issuer. As I mentioned earlier, foreign private issuers don't have to comply with all the rules that US companies have to. They may decide not to comply with certain specific requirements of Nasdaq. So a foreign private issuer must be a foreign non-US company and not a government entity. It must have 50% or less of its outstanding voting securities directly or indirectly held by US residents. If 50% or more are held by US resident, that entity must not have a majority of its directors as US residents or citizens, must not have more than 50% of its assets in the US, and must not run its business principally in the US. Most of our deals are really with FBIs. We have a few instances where we had non-US companies creating holding companies in the US, and they use that as the listing vehicle. So we didn't use an F1, we use an S1. But mostly the way our deals are structured is there's an offshore holding company, whether in Cayman Islands or the BVI, which is holding the operating subsidiaries in Asia. And that holding company is the one being listed in the US. So a private company that does not qualify as a foreign private issuer under these criteria will be treated as a US domestic company under SEC and Nasdaq rules. I won't go into too many details, but a foreign private issuer always have the options to follow its own country practice in lieu of Nasdaq corporate governance, and it must do that by submitting a statement to Nasdaq. And usually that's done with local counsel who can certify that's what's being done in that country. Most of our clients, although they're eligible to follow home country practice, do not, but it's always an option. In Asia, foreign control public companies are subject to largely the same listing and post-listing requirements as domestic companies in the US. FPIs, foreign private issuers, such as those formed in Korea, can benefit from certain exemptions, as I said before. For example, FPIs have 4 months after their fiscal year end to file their annual report with the SEC. It's a report on Form 20F. It's 60 days or 75 days or 90 days for domestic US issuers, depending on their size. FPIs don't have to file quarterly reports like 10Qs. I think you have also this requirement here in Korea, where you have to file periodic reports. So for an FPI, you only have to file a 6K, which is to disclose if anything material happens to the company. Also, Nasdaq requires an FPI to issue a 6K to disclose their interim financial statements once a year before the end of their fiscal year. So it's a lighter reporting requirement than a US company. Again, accounting standard, US GAAP, there are some other discussions, but I think my fellow presenter will discuss this after me. There's certain exemptions from disclosure rules from Regulation FD for FPIs that provides that when a domestic US issuer discloses material non-public information to a certain person, it must at the same time make a public disclosure. That doesn't apply to FPIs. And FPIs are also not subject to Section 16 of the Exchange Act, which requires insiders to file public reports of their share ownership and trading activities. So this doesn't apply to an FPI. Just briefly, there was a release from the SEC which was asking for comments by September 8. So the date has passed, but I haven't read any update on this. They were thinking of changing the definition of private issuer to kind of even the requirements for foreign private issuers and domestic companies. They wanted to make sure that US investors are protected the same way, whether it's an FPI or a US domestic company. Again, I don't think there's been an update, so we don't know if that definition is going to change or not, but it's something just to keep in mind in case it happens. So SEC filings, in addition to the Nasdaq requirements for listing, depending on the market you list on, an FPI must register its shares with the SEC. So in connection with an IPO, companies raise a certain minimum amount of money, and they must register their shares by filing the registration statement on Form F1 with the SEC. And that includes a prospectus, which is the document that is being used by the underwriters to market the deal to their investors. Filings I made electronically on EDGAR, which is the SEC filing system. Typically what happens on an IPO is you first submit a confidential filing, you get some comments, you can go several rounds of confidential filing, and typically companies clear all the comments with the SEC before filing publicly with EDGAR. All confidential filings are not showing on the SEC website until you make the first SEC public filing. So they're all released. Then once you're close to the end and you're cleared all SEC comments, you also have to make sure that the underwriters and their counsel and the company have cleared any comments by FINRA, which regulates the underwriters. Typically, this moves along the same timeline as the SEC, usually much faster, actually. Timetable, this is just a sample timetable. I know the previous speaker talked about, 6 months. In my experience, that's not really the case. It takes, unfortunately, longer. So what we see is typically 12 to 18 months, which is more of the recent timeline for IPOs. So the main thing again is, once you start the deal, to when you go effective with the SEC, it all depends on how many rounds of comments you're going to get from the SEC. So as I said before, you really have to make sure that you have your financials in order. You have the auditors all lined up, ready to issue their opinion, sign off on the registration statements. You have to have the underwriters that you selected ready to market the deal once you're clear with the SEC. And you also have to work with Nasdaq, which you have to submit an initial application with Nasdaq. Nasdaq will have some comments, pretty much always the same, but there's a long list of comments, and as they do their own due diligence on the company, they'll issue more comments. So that takes a while, and Nasdaq lately has been taking a bit longer than it used to. After the initial submission that you make with the SEC, you have 30 days. The SEC has 30 days, sorry, to respond and issue comments. And then the company and counsels will respond to those comments, and this goes on until the SEC has no more comments. Also, I understand that there's a similar process in Korea. So a Korean company going for an IPO in the US would also have to make some filings here in Korea concurrently with the filings made in the US and clear with the regulators here. I think the timeline is a bit different, but my understanding is that it doesn't add any time because it's 30 days in the US. I think it's 15 and then changes some other deadlines in Korea. So I don't think that would raise an issue, but the next presenter will go into this a little bit more in detail. Again, before you can go effective, you need the no objections letter from FINRA, and you have to make sure that you don't have any more comments from Nasdaq, and they issue their approval to go on Nasdaq. Use of a dual class structure. A lot of companies use a dual class structure. Class A, Class B. They're going to be listing the Class A, which are the securities going to be offered to the public. Class B shares are shares that are issued to the founders of the company or key investors. This is usually done to protect the interest of the founders, and that's something that is totally accepted by the SEC and Nasdaq. It's very common in the US, so it shouldn't be an issue. One more thing, maybe not on the slide, but most Korean companies that are currently public in the US do not list their shares directly. They list ADRs, American Depository Receipts. So it's a two-tier structure where instead of investing into shares, you invest into those certificates that represent shares of the issuer. It's done for several reasons, which again is going to be discussed after that. But it's very common in the US and doesn't really add a lot of complexity to the deal. Sometimes it makes it easier to comply with local laws. Cost of listing, I won't go into numbers, but you have to keep in consideration that you'll have to pay fees for the underwriters, the auditors, your legal counsels, not only U.S. counsels. By the way, we don't charge $2,000 an hour for an email, so don't worry about that. It's usually flat fees on an IPO, and it's something that can be controlled by the issuer. And also local counsels, very important. If you're using a Cayman entity to go listed, you need a Cayman counsel. If your operating subs are in Korea, you need Korean counsel, because they all need to work together to make sure the prospectus and the registration statements are disclosing everything under Cayman or BVI law or Korean law. So you also have the cost of a transfer agent. You also have the cost of a financial printer. The costs vary depending on the complexity of the deal and the deal size and the various auditors or law firms that you're going to work with. But keep that in mind, that you have costs for the IPO. You have costs to get ready for the IPO. You have costs post-IPO, and then you have someone going compliance obligations, which also but everything can be quantified, and the costs are not that significant when you think about potential of talking about this. How many once you look at it, I mentioned before, you have to file a Form 20F, Form 6K, when something material happens to the company. You also become subject to Sarbanes-Oxley, various rules to comply. Same thing here. Corporate governance rules, you'll need to have an independent board of directors and audit committee. So, you'll have to have a majority of independent directors. So that's something to think about too when you start your application process. You need to find candidates that would be your independent directors. The compliance rules, once you become public, you have to comply with certain ongoing rules that are listed here, depending on what market you're on. And that's it for me. I'll be happy to take any questions at the Q&A session. I'll give the podium to you.